Listeners, what if the stories we tell about ourselves aren't really ours? And what if we could finally trace them back to where they began? This is something I've been asking myself for years, and today I am excited to share a few ways you can answer those questions for yourself through Family Constellations work. This week's guest, Tania Gonzalez-Ortega, is a Family Constellations practitioner with 25 years of experience in energy work. During our conversation, we explore the benefits and challenges of the dark night of the soul, how some of what we experience during the dark night isn't ours, and how we can work with those connections in ways that allow us to live our fullest, most empowered lives. Be sure to stick around for the incredible exercise Tania shares with us. It's already making me think differently about my book. Let's dive in. Welcome to Writing Resilience, the podcast for writers who want to write and live the story that sets them free. I'm your host, Lisa Cooper Ellison, a writer, transformational and trauma-informed coach, story alchemist, and fellow traveler on the winding road of healing and creativity. Each week, I'll share tools, practices, and conversations that will help you let go of what no longer serves you as you create stories that change lives, especially your own. Together, we'll explore how to trust your creative voice, support your mental health and resilience, work with your nervous system and unique design, and stay connected to your deepest calling as a writer, even when life gets messy. It's time, my friends, to write and live the story that sets you free. I'm honored to walk that journey alongside you, one story and one episode at a time. Welcome, Tania, to the Writing and Resilience podcast. I am so happy to have you on today.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, listeners, you are in for a treat because Tania is going to talk about something that is really fundamental to understanding who we are and also to the stories that we write and the stories that we tell ourselves. And I'm going to let her tell you about it. But I want you to first open your mind and think about what those stories are. What is the story you're telling yourself right now about who you are and who helped you become this? Okay, now that you have your story, Tania, tell us a little about yourself and what you do.
Okay, so a little bit about me is that I started out as a fine artist as a young woman, went to school for that. Once I graduated, I ended up in education because I felt really drawn to the children and was thinking about, okay, well, what is the best use of my time and energy considering just how troubled the planet is and was at the time, it still is. So I ended up in Waldorf education, which found me. And so I studied Steiner. I worked with young children, which is really beautiful. If you don't know anything about it, if you're a parent, I highly suggest you Google it, look into it. But it's a wonderful educational approach to the child. And during that time as a teacher, I went on a little yoga retreat. And that was kind of like the beginning of my spiritual awakening. I felt very different after that retreat. And I was very like, whoa, what is this? Like things are clearer, more crisp, more alive. And so I ended up becoming a yoga teacher with the Shivananda Ashram organization. And I ended up in their ashram in San Francisco and Grass Valley in Los Angeles, where I taught yoga and basically was living a monastic life, even though I wasn't ordained as a monk, but I was definitely living that life. And that's when I had my spiritual awakening, which was a very challenging one. It was definitely a Kundalini awakening experience, which I didn't know that's what was happening to me at the time. So long story short, though, I left because of the health issues and all of the anxiety and the depression that I was experiencing and the overwhelm and disorientation, not understanding what was going on with me. And so I left. And then after a couple of years of really being in that and looking for answers, I had this sort of miraculous experience. And that's the only way I could describe it, because I went from being extremely ridden with anxiety and overwhelm and depression to then it being totally gone overnight. And really, it was through my encounter with Christ, which I didn't have a relationship before. So that was something totally new. I learned a lot from that experience in terms of what is spirituality, what are some of the things that get in the way. And I think for me, it was just a huge pattern of performing for love. and feeling like even on the spiritual path, I felt like I had to prove my worthiness or somehow earn God's grace. And in that experience, I learned that I never had to do anything in order to receive God's grace. And so that's when sort of my deeper healing then began, and I got into energy work and then discovered Family Constellations. And I came across that back in 2012, probably 2013. And then I went into training and became a facilitator. In about 2019 is when I started working with clients. And I found Family Constellations to be so amazingly effective in tracing where the trauma comes from. So, in my experience of my overwhelm, just the physical overwhelm, the mental overwhelm with my awakening experience, my first constellation that I received, I realized that there was a lot of trauma in my mother's lineage that I didn't know anything about, including her own trauma. And what was revealed to me was really that I had inherited all of that trauma, and my body was just really couldn't continue to carry it. Like it was just building and building and building and building. And I was trying to hold it and realize, oh, most of it wasn't mine to carry. And so we can unburden ourselves and really rewire our nervous system so that we can give back what doesn't belong to us and then create that space for us to step into our fullest potential and what we came here to do.
Well, I love how meandering your experience was, because mine was as well. And I did spend time in the education system, which I can definitely attest to has a lot of brokenness. And it was the reason I left. For me, I worked in the inner city in Louisville, Kentucky, and I was a special education teacher. And it was a really intense environment because I was working with people who had a lot of critical needs. I was working with children who had just had so many things happen to them. And some days they would come in to the classroom with things having just happened to them. And then here I am trying to hold space for their experience and also having the pressure of it's math time, right? And those two things do not work well together. I resonate with that so much. And then this concept of performing for love. Yeah, I know a lot about that. I know a lot about that. It's been part of my awakening process. I think it's so important for us to talk about awakening because I tell listeners all the time that we're meaning making animals, and awakening is how we make meaning, right? It's how we expand the meaning of our lives. And for so many of us, that awakening happens through the dark night of the soul, the challenge, the hardship. And it's on the other side of it that we can see the magnificence of it or the power. But when you're in the middle of that, oh my goodness.
It's terrifying. I know there's different varying degrees, but my experience of the dark night of the soul was it was like my soul left. I could not feel anything. There was no joy, there was no happiness. I couldn't even really feel sadness, like complete numbness and disconnected from all of life. And that's what was causing the anxiety because it was like, what is this? Where am I? It's like no man's land. I remember at the time I was seeing a psychiatrist actually who put me on a bunch of medications, which honestly, they never did anything for me really. But one thing she said was at some point this will end, meaning the depression. And I couldn't understand how because I was so used to knowing like, oh, if there's a problem, you fix it. Right? Like, oh, maybe I just need to meditate more, or I need to go on a cleanse, or I just need to think the right thoughts. And none of that was working. And at that time, I came across St. John of the Cross's writings, The Dark Night of the Soul. And he described it basically in a nutshell that there's nothing you can do about it. It's a purification. And it's up to God to decide when you're done, essentially. So he really was saying like no amount of prayer, no amount of meditation is going to get you out of this. That's kind of what honestly kind of kept me alive is just knowing like, okay, I don't know, there's something to this. I don't understand it. But it wasn't until I surrendered and I finally let go of trying to fix it. And that's when everything changed, like overnight. I literally felt like I made a proclamation to God. I said, okay, my life is yours to do whatever you want. I'm not going to try to fix this anymore. And that's when things changed. And so it's just so counterintuitive. We're so taught to do something. And yeah, surrender is a hard thing to grasp if you've never had to really do it before, especially when it's like involving your life, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, I want to say kudos for finding that work and for going through that process and finding the fact that surrender is often the way forward. I can say for myself that definitely made a difference for me. And for so many trauma survivors, it can be really difficult to do because one thing that can happen that rewires our nervous system is that we get rewired to hypervigilance. And it's that hypervigilant piece of us that wants to fix things, that wants to do, that wants to be in action, and that often feels that action and control are the things that are going to get us away from whatever the discomfort is. And something that I have gone back to again and again, I have this Osho Zen tarot deck. There's two cards, there's nothingness and there's aloneness. And they both have this idea of being in the gap, right? And being your own light. And that can be so hard for us to do. But I think when you can find some visual or some piece of writing or something you can hold on to that allows you to make sense of what's happening, it makes all the difference.
Yeah, it's definitely at least something, even if you don't understand it, at least it can bring in some level of faith. And I think reading St. John of the Cross is like, okay, other people have been through this before. I'm not an anomaly, this happens. That brought some level of comfort for the way forward, for sure.
I love that. And part of what was happening to me in that dark night of the soul, when I was in deep depression and anxiety and my body was failing, all of the things were happening. I wasn't just holding on to my story. Like you, when you talked about how there was this ancestral story, that played a huge role for me. If you could go back to that point, what would you say to that part of you, given what you now know about family constellations and that form of therapy? What would you say?
I mean, really, that this isn't all yours and it's not your fault. Like you didn't do something wrong. We tend to think that somehow we caused the things that we go through. And we tend to, I think, just go into our minds of just trying to figure out, oh my gosh, where did I go wrong? What should I have done differently? And trauma can certainly be such a gift, only if you can move through it, of course, only if you really get to the other side fully, because once you do get to the other side, the gift that it brings is that it allows us the capacity to really hold space for others. Maybe I would say to myself back then is there's a gift in this, I promise. You're not going through this torture because life is meaningless or because you've messed up and you're never going to get back on track. Or I would just see things like little messages like, never give up, and just really knowing that this too shall pass. So what I find is you can really feel when you come into contact with somebody that has been through a lot in life and they've digested it, they've transmuted it, they've accepted it. They carry a level of peace that's really beautiful. And they seem to be able to behold another in a way that is just so deeply loving versus somebody, let's say, that's either never had difficulty or they're not willing to do the work. To me, what it feels like is a kind of a shallowness, maybe a more materialistic view of life, an unwillingness to face what's uncomfortable. And so I think the gift for me is just having gone through that, it's like, oh, right, everything's always changing and life really is temporary, and that there's something greater, there's a larger reality, a greater mystery that we're a part of, and to surrender to the journey. But I think what family constellation work reveals is kind of like to be able to actually have a real experience of what's behind the veil. I think we often think that, oh yeah, I have ancestors, but what do they matter? You know what I mean? Like they're dead, like what relevance do they have? And I think we're beginning to realize that their life experiences actually does get passed down through our DNA, like even just at a scientific level. And when those experiences aren't resolved or there's something that's out of order, it can end up with us to sort out. So if it's showing up in our life, then it really is an opportunity to do the work not only for ourselves, but for our lineage, for what exists within the spiritual realms. And so that level of healing transformation really ripples out throughout the collective. And I think that's what we're experiencing now with so many people going through awakening experiences. It's like popcorn. One person's waking up and then it activates another and another and another. And even in ways that we can't see, even what appears to us as illogical. But that's what I'm seeing is a lot of people just waking up. And not because they're necessarily doing anything or maybe even consciously trying to wake up. They're having these awakening experiences. And so it's an interesting time for sure.
Yes, it is. I'm seeing this as well. I'm seeing it in the people that I work with, my clients. I'm seeing this in friends. I'm seeing it all over the place. And it is pretty magical to see people wake up and awaken to their full potential and to claim their power. It's amazing. And usually the process is messy. And when it's messy, having a guide is incredibly helpful. So I want to just stop for a minute in case someone doesn't know what family constellations therapy is. Could you tell us what it is and give us a sense of what that might look like or how we identify our ancestors?
Yeah. So Family Constellations was created by Bert Hellinger. He was a German family therapist, and he brought this work in the 90s to the planet, and it's much more popular in Europe and India and other places. It's still relatively unknown in the United States. So there's a lot to it, but I'll try my best to explain it because it's one of those things that I can explain it, and until you experience it, then you really know, because it is an experiential thing. It's phenomenological, so it's really meeting what's in the moment. And the way a family constellation unfolds really depends on what's happening in the moment. So it's not like, oh, there's this protocol and this happens and this happens and this happens. As a facilitator, I never know what's going to happen or what needs to happen. There's different ways to conduct constellations, but I'll describe what a group process looks like. So let's say I'm hosting a constellation workshop and there's a room full of, let's say, 15 people, and one person is going to receive a constellation. So that client will tell me what the issue is. It could be health issues, it could be relationship issues, it could be money issues, it could be emotional issues, really anything. And we don't go into the story. There's no like, okay, tell me when this started. How long has it been with you? Like, we don't get caught up in the story because it's not necessary. We don't want the person to be reliving and telling themselves what's so. Because in family constellations, we're zooming out and we're looking at it from a much broader perspective, not just through your lens. And so, like you said, we like to make stories where we make meaning out of our lives. And oftentimes we're making these stories up about ourselves and our lives that actually might not necessarily even be true. And we're living as if it's true. So let's just say the client, for example, is having relationship issues. They keep attracting the same kind of mate over and over again, and they can't seem to break that cycle. So I would have the client then choose someone to represent themselves, someone to choose the mother, someone to choose the father. And so those representatives, those are people that are in the group that get chosen. Now, the people in the group, what I find really powerful is these people have no connection, generally speaking, to the client. They don't know the client's story. They don't know anything about them. And so then, because we're consciously working with the field, that's the intention, the knowing field, those representatives will then come and step into the circle, and they'll get placed wherever the client feels that they're to be standing and which direction they're supposed to be facing. And the minute those representatives step in, things start automatically happening. They start feeling things in their bodies that aren't theirs. They're definitely taking on those roles, and that information is just coming through the field. So maybe the person that's representing the client might be saying, oh yeah, I'm feeling a lot of anxiety when I'm looking at my father. Or maybe the representative as the mother's like, oh, I can't look at the father. Something else is drawing me in a different direction. And so it'll unfold like that. And so the representatives are communicating what is coming through them. And really 99% of the time, it's accurate. The client will say, oh my gosh, that's totally what my father would say, or that's exactly how my mother was. So because of that, something's activated where the client's like, whoa, okay, what is this? This is like mirroring back to me exactly my life, the situation in my life. Where we go further is then we track this relationship issue. Where did it stem from? Maybe the grandfather was a philanderer. Maybe he had many mistresses and it was a secret that was never talked about, or, things like this. And so that ends up showing up in the field. So sometimes more representatives will be brought in to represent different people and elements. And where the healing comes from is where we start using what Bert Hellinger called healing sentences. So these sentences, I would say, come at the level of the soul, and there's statements that need to be spoken and are what is true. An example of a healing sentence could be, maybe from the daughter to the father, I give back to you your anger. It's not mine to carry. Or let's say there was a role reversal and the daughter acted more like the parent and the parent was more like the child. You would say, I was supposed to be the little one and you were supposed to be the big one. I take my role back as the child and you as the parent. So these kind of things, so what happens is the constellation will reveal where the disruptions in the flow of love, the order of love, because there is an order to love. And there's ways that when we're out of place in the constellation, then that's how it ends up impacting our life in a negative way. And so when we can restore order in the constellation, then the flow of love can come through from the ancestors and everyone in your lineage towards you. What happens to a lot of people, I think, when it comes to trauma, and I think sometimes it's obviously a necessary step, like let's say if you were abused by your mother or your father, that you like kind of put up a hand up and like, I'm done with you, I don't want to talk to you, that's it. But at some point, the deeper work is really, you don't want to cut yourself off from them because they did give you life. And so there is a process to where basically you come to a place of acceptance, and then that you accept your place within the lineage, but you don't have to continue carrying that story of victimhood, or whatever. So I hope that helps explain it. But yeah, like I said, oftentimes it can be very cathartic, very eye-opening. And even for the people that are representing the constellation, even if it's not about them, they will often receive some profound insight into their own life playing that particular role. And so it's important to note that it's not psychodrama. It's not like, oh, let's just pretend to be the mom and the dad and we'll just make up what we think happened. There's actually things that just start happening, bodily sensations, feelings, emotions, things like that.
Oh, I love this explanation, which I think you did beautifully. And it was making me think of Fritz Perls' Gestalt work, that there's some element of Gestalt. And so I'm going back to my counseling days and way back into counseling theory, which has been a while. But Fritz Perls did a lot of work in the moment. He had a famous exercise, which was the empty chair. And, you would sit in a chair and then there would be a chair that would represent someone in your family that you had conflict with, or it doesn't have to be in family, it could be anywhere. And you would say the things that you had not had a chance to say. And sometimes if there was another person in that chair as a representative, they might say the things that you needed to hear. And what's interesting is that I was never a Gestalt therapist. So Gestalt therapists, if you're listening and I've got something wrong, please feel free to correct it. What I find though is, I work as an Akashic Records healer and reader. And when I'm doing Akashic Records healings, which can sometimes feel a little like a choose your own adventure story, there is this energetic element where people go where they need to go to release stuck energy. And there is often, some story element. They go to a place. It could be a past life, and past life could be another lifetime or another part of this life where something is unresolved. And depending on the trauma, a person may arrive that could be a perpetrator or someone else who was not seeing the person. It can show up in a lot of different ways. And what I find happens in these healings is that there will come a point where the person will have something they need to say, some truth that needs to be vocalized. And then sometimes this higher self version of the person that is there will take that in and will reveal a message. And there is something that shifts as a result of that work. And so I do it in a very different way, but I have seen this. And there's incredible power in that. And when you can allow yourself to be with that, it can have dramatic impacts in your life. And something else that's coming up for me right now, and I'm wondering if there's a way, and feel free to say no, because no is a complete sentence, especially in podcast world. I'm wondering if we can go through a very short exercise where listeners can get a sense of what this is like, because I'd like to turn that into a writing exercise. It is not going to be a replacement for family constellations work by any means. It cannot be that, but a way to tap into that sense of ancestry so that they can do a little of that work on their own. And then if they're interested in working with you or someone else, they have an experience that they can use as an anchor.
Yeah, I can describe a simple exercise that people can do to have an experience of what it's like to work with the knowing field. And you can do this by yourself, or it can be helpful to do it with another that's observing and watching, because sometimes we don't catch all the things that we're experiencing or, displaying with our bodies. So let's say if you wanted to get a sense for your matrilineal lineage, what you could do then is have different pieces of paper, 8.5 by 11, or it could be smaller. And you would write on the paper, okay, mother, grandmother, great grandmother, one on each page, right? You can go back as far as you want. You could go back however many generations. To start, I would do it blind. And what a blind constellation is where you step into the element not knowing what it is. So if you turn the pieces of paper over, so mother, grandmother, great-grandmother, turning them over, mixing them up so you don't know which is which, putting them face down on the floor. Let's say you just start with the 3. You step on 1. You can close your eyes and you could just, okay, what are you feeling? And you will feel something. Maybe you feel like, whoa, I feel like something's pushing me backwards, or, oh my gosh, my hands are getting fidgety, or I'm feeling jittery, or, oh wow, I'm feeling a lot of heat in my belly. It could be anything. And so when you step on those, to take note, okay, what is it that I'm feeling? That's why it's helpful if you have somebody observing, recording what it is that you're feeling and what you're noticing, and not looking at it yet, going on to the next paper, doing the same process. Okay, what are you feeling? What are you noticing? And you might even hear words too. There might be something that's being said or an image that's coming through. So just recording all of your experience and then going back and then flipping the papers over. Oh, when I was feeling jittery in my body, that was my grandmother. Oh, when I was feeling bliss, oh, it was my great-grandmother, like whatever it was. And so then saying what those sensations were, you can go back and step back onto those pieces of paper and go deeper. What else do you notice? So that's just a simple example of a way of sensing into the field. You can sense into anything. It could be your business even, or if you're faced with a choice, what are the different choices, and feeling into those choices and how they feel into your body. Yeah, and so that's a great way to do it.
I love that for 2 reasons. One, it directly relates to something that I'm working on in a project, which I'll share in a moment. But the other thing is that as you were talking about family constellations, I was thinking about those pieces of paper even before you said them. I love that connection point because I was like, oh, the pieces of paper, they have to be on. So yeah, I love that. And I'm going to be doing that very soon because I'm working on a project where the breath plays a huge role. And what I've noticed in writing this is that thinking about my ancestry, let's see, it would be my great grandmother fell off of a ship when the ship was coming to the United States from Ireland and drowned.
Oh, wow.
And so there's this lineage of drowning that came across several generations in the forms of like congestive heart failure. And, in my case, I've had severe asthma. And even now I'm dealing with a health issue, which I find to be fascinating, which is related to my lungs. And there's very different ways that the lungs show up throughout this piece in my own life. And so I definitely think there is that ancestral piece. There is some sort of story that I have been carrying that is not mine. And yet it is mine to transmute, right? Because I am living it.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's what the work is. And when we do the work ourselves, then we are actually impacting the future generations to me, it's just kind of mind-blowing what the ramifications are, really, when you think about it. It's like, yes, we go into family constellations work because we want our life to be better, but it makes me think of Indra's net, of how we're living in this interconnected universe where each intersection is this jewel that reflects all the other jewels inside of the net. And so when one aspect of the universe, however small it is, it really does ripple out. I mean, it's just quantum physics. And so, yeah, I find it really fascinating that it really feels like, to me, just in the last not very long, that this work with trauma is really taking shape, moving forward, and really coming up with, well, just understanding more deeply what's in our DNA, what is our nervous system, like who we are really, and what is our subconscious mind. And there's just so much that I think is being revealed and uncovered that makes it a really, really amazing time to be alive.
I 100% agree. And it is incredible to see how people can blossom when they decide to do this work. And I often use the metaphor of the drop of water in the lake. You can't always see where the ripples go, but they go somewhere. And I've certainly experienced in my own life that as I've healed, people around me change, not because I'm changing them by any means, because that never works, but on their own. And I think it's just when we shift the energy shifts around us.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because it's true. With family constellations work, it can be really, almost seems like it's a miracle when, for example, I had a constellation that I did around my brother. We were estranged and went through the constellation. It was literally the next day that I came into contact with him by chance. It was like, oh my gosh, he's on the phone, was not expected. And things like that happen all the time. There was another woman who was struggling with her son who was dealing with addiction. He was resisting going into rehab, things like this. And so she was, of course, very distraught. And she came to me to want to do a constellation. And I said, well, we can't do it for him, but we can do it for you and just see what's there in your relationship with each other and in the family. And so there was some loyalties there between him and the grandfather. And she experienced a lot of peace and relief from that constellation. And I think it was like 2 weeks later, her son ended up reaching out to her, asking for her help and that he was ready to go into rehab. These things do really shift at the quantum level and do have an impact on those around us.
All right, listeners, you have a chance to change the quantum in your life, and I invite you to do so. And, this is just one of the things that you explore because you have this practice, right? You have this practice that you do with your clients, but you also have this beautiful podcast, the New Earth Consciousness podcast, where you're interviewing all kinds of people who are doing healings and working with energy and have different perspectives on the things that are happening in life. What would you like to say about that podcast and also what you're learning from all of the interviews that you've done in that podcast?
Yeah, so the podcast really is a very wide open sort of space when it comes to, okay, what do we talk about? New Earth consciousness, what does that mean? There are people there talking about business, like business and the new earth. How does business shift and change moving forward? We definitely talk about energy work, energy healing. How do you create conscious communities, creatives, visionaries, healers? Really, any topic that you could imagine that would fit inside of New Earth consciousness. I mean, it could be conscious parenting, for example, or astrology, or, you were on there talking about the power of writing and how that can transform somebody in their healing journey. And so there's all kinds of interviews there that you can check out. My perception is that there is so much light on the planet. I mean, so many amazing people who are walking with love in their heart, with a dedication to uplifting humanity. And I think it's more than we realize. And I think it's just really a matter of time where really just this oppressive system that we've all have had to participate in for however many hundreds and thousands of years is crumbling and shifting and changing. And I guess what I'll say is like the good news is that there is a matrix of light that's being built. And so I would just say that, yeah, what I've been learning is that we are all activating each other in more ways than we realize, through conversations, through what we hear. Yeah. And I think that also the way forward is within our connections with each other, going deep into our connections and our relationships and cultivating. You think about cultivating the soil, like nurturing it, nourishing it. Cultivating those relationships and those connections is what's going to be the fertile ground for a new earth.
I love that. And one of the things you and I were talking about before I hit the record button was the importance of communities and in real life communities, right? Real connections. Not that you can't have a real connection with someone online, but there is something different when it's mediated by a screen. And so when you think of the New Earth consciousness connections, what would you like to say about that as we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, I think technology is great. Obviously, like now we have this almost overabundance of information and access to information and, with social media, making connections with others. I do think, however, that it's important to keep ourselves grounded and tethered to reality and through real world interactions with each other in person, making the effort to spend time in our communities, creating offerings within our communities. I live in a small community, so I think it's just necessary, and it helps to bring harmony into the community and also into your own life, because I think it's important for us to really ask ourselves, when you're on your deathbed and you're reflecting on your life, it's like we're not going to really remember necessarily those moments where we were on the screen. It's the moments, the memories that we have in person with each other that we end up remembering the most. So
Absolutely. It's that feeling when you look into someone's eyes, or the way it feels when someone gives you a hug. Those just very deep, intimate touches and connections that are difficult to have on screen. So thank you for that reminder. Well, this has been an amazing conversation. And if people want to learn more about you, they want to learn more about Family Constellations work, what are the best ways for them to connect with you?
yeah, you can go to newearthconsciousness.com. You can find me on Facebook. If you look for Tania Elena, you can find me there. My YouTube channel is just youtube.com/at New Earth Consciousness, all one word. And you can find me in those places.
Well, listeners, I highly recommend that you do that and to listen to her amazing podcast. And all of the links will be in the show notes. So it'll be very easy for you to connect with her. Well, Tania, thank you so much for being on the show today. It has been just an absolute gift to spend time with you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. This has been really wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to learn more about Tania and her work, please see the show notes for this episode. And if you'd like to take this a little deeper, I want you to think about a personal conflict you're facing or a legacy you're confronting in your writing work, and identify the ancestors in the lineage for this issue. Who are they? Try to sum them up in 1 or 2 words in the YouTube comments for this episode. I'd love to hear what this sparked for you. And speaking of your thoughts and comments on the podcast, I'd like to give a quick shout out to Jessica Ure and Stephanie Shafran for your thoughts on my episode with Atash Yagmayan. It was so wonderful to hear from you, and thank you for your generous feedback. And listeners, if you haven't reached out to the show, you can make my day by leaving a YouTube comment. I would love to hear from you. That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. I couldn't do this podcast without your support. If you love this episode, here are 3 simple ways that you can keep this show thriving. 1, subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. 2, leave a 5-star review so others can find the show. 3, join my engaged dynamic community by signing up for the Writing Your Resilience newsletter. As a thank you, you'll receive a free copy of Ditch Your Inner Critic, 5 tools to transform self-doubt into self-support. Until next time, remember that your story matters. As you write and connect with the truest, most authentic version, you become not just the writer, but the person you're meant to be. And that, my friends, is the real freedom writing can offer.